Yeah, if you can share this with 3 people, give me a good review, support in any way you can, come on, get involved, help me with technical issues. I'm looking for experts with like putting stuff on YouTube, audio files, etc. Get in touch. And if you can, contribute financially through coffee.com, which will be in the notes as well, the details for that. It might just be the price of a cup of coffee a month for you, but it makes a big difference to me. Thanks for Nathan for the contribution last month, mate. I really appreciate that. And everyone who's given me support over the last few months, brilliant. I am chasing the dream, and I've said this before, but I forget who the quote was. Tread softly because you tread on me dreams. And I'm 44, I'm 45 in a couple of weeks, and I am chasing my dreams by doing podcasting because I like listening to them, I like making them, and I like helping people. So ticks a lot of boxes. Follow me on Twitter at North Podcasts. Every little thing you do listening helps. I am on YouTube now. You can go to North and South Podcasts and find me on there. There's a few videos as well which you might find useful about things like journaling and making the most of the mornings, which are things that I've mentioned before. Also, there's a bit of poetry I do live on there as well. I might do more of that in the future. Again, if you want to get involved and help me with all that, feel free. And let's take this project forward. I'll put details of that in the notes too. I've been to Prescot today for a drink, and Prescot is a suburb of Liverpool, if you like, and it's in Knowsley, a different local authority, but they've got a theatre, Shakespeare North Playhouse in Prescot, and I think it's just great outside major city centres that we've got such cultural events. I'd like to get someone from that theatre on, but it's basically a big theatre that's in Prescot, and it's got an old stage, which is the only one outside London in that particular style. There's going to be comedy and music at the venue as well, but also lots of theatre and drama. So that's really exciting. The Shakespeare North Playhouse, I'll put details in the podcast notes. Also, I went to see a fantastic play on Friday by Steven Berkoff, and the play was called Dog Actor. And I went with my good friend David Moorhead, who has done a fantastic play called Forgotten Voices, which you can check out in an earlier podcast. I think it was podcast 6 or 7. But check out David Moorhead's play Forgotten Voices. There's a link in that podcast notes, and he'll be on again soon. But Steven Berkoff's coming to Cambridge, Bath, Camden, Wimbledon and the Edinburgh Fringe. So check out that play, Dog Actor. It was really, really good. Physical theatre, good use of music, just him on the stage. Fantastic. I really enjoyed it at the fantastic Hope Street Theatre in Liverpool, which is a nice little venue. So thoroughly recommended. So a little bit of creativity in this podcast, but it's primarily a well-being podcast today because I'm going to talk about one of the most important things or skills that you'll ever learn in your life, and it's the skill of what we call equanimity. Now, equanimity means to stay calm in difficult situations. And as we know, life throws up lots of difficult situations. Some can seem quite trivial to others. Others might seem quite serious to others and also serious to ourselves. But suffering is a part of human life, and we often get lots of curveballs and spanners getting thrown into the works. And it can be very difficult to stay level-headed and equanimous. I still haven't learned how to say equanimous properly. Now, I came across the word equanimity. I've heard it before, obviously, but it's like a skill, isn't it? And it's common sense that we should stay calm and not lose our heads because it's bad for our health. If we get angry and wound up and frustrated, we shouldn't be doing that very often. It is a useful evolutionary tool because it gets us away from threats, but it can often be something which becomes generalised, and you often recognise angry, unhappy people and miserable people as people who do not value or do not practice equanimity as much as others might. I started finding out about equanimity as a focus of study through meditation, and I do find meditation very helpful. I do it every day. I use the Sam Harris app, I use the Calm app, which is very good. If you're having trouble sleeping, the Calm app can be very useful as well. I think it's like 30 quid for the year, and you do like going to sleep meditations, which I find very useful. But I do the Sam Harris, which is a little bit more spiritual. But on his excellent podcasts or on his app, he has lots of lectures, Sam Harris, about things like equanimity. And it comes from the Buddhist thing about, or the Buddhist approach to life, whereby you just don't get overly wound up by things that happen. You take a step back, you realise that situations are purely temporary, that a situation doesn't exist objectively, it's how you interpret it, which is important. If you look at, say, Jesus Christ as well in the Christian tradition, always stayed calm unless he was turning over the tables of the money lenders in the temple, which was a rare event. But it shows that you should only get wound up in very serious situations when it warrants it. Now, even if you're not religious or not very spiritual, it's common sense that we should stay nice and calm and not get wound up by things and develop strategies to cope with what each day brings us, and also these more testing times, what they bring us as well. Equanimity is like a muscle, and the more you strengthen it, the better you become. And I defy anyone to get angry, wound up, shout, get in fights with the loved ones and the people who they live with and say that they feel better afterwards. We don't. We do it because it's about the ego, it's about assertion, it's also about identifying defense mechanisms for our mental egos and our physical selves as well, dating through evolution. So it does serve a purpose. But basically, we need to stay calm and measured and composed in our day-to-day lives. Now, some people say, oh, that's a bit of a weakness, isn't it? If you're always like staying calm and you don't get wound up, etc. But no, it's a strength. It's not about giving up. You still defend yourself. If someone attacks you, you defend yourself. It's not about being weak. It's about being assertive and not escalating things. It's about saying, right, I'm not going to get wound up in this situation now because it's not going to help. Now, I still get wound up in situations. People do. Some of us might be genetically, environmentally predisposed, whatever. But we need to learn these skills and apply them as much as we possibly can to become better people. When you have a problem, you need to be rational and solution focused, and you need to develop strategies to overcome the situation. And it may well be that at that particular time that you're feeling stressed, that's not the best time to deal with it. You need to be rational and you need to be solution focused. People who are show equanimity tend to be people who we might call well adjusted, and people who are wise and want conflict resolution in as calm a way as possible. So it's about wisdom as well, dealing with conflict and resolving it in a calm way. You're not always going to get what you want. You might have to compromise. You might not get anything of what you want, but we need to be wise and we need to resolve our conflicts as peacefully as possible. It may well be that you need to totally remove yourself from situations and people to move forward, but also we'll get wound up by people who are close to us, who are our family and friends, and it's about being able to deal with that as well. I've said before, one of the first things you need to know in life is you. What is your mind like? What are you like day to day? Are you a negative person? Are you a positive person? Do you get wound up? Do you feel disillusioned? Do you feel angry about things? And if that is you, then you need to recognize that. Are you quick to anger? What are your triggers? Again, we've said it might be genetic, environmental aspects. Do you suffer from ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, which are affecting your adult life? Have things happened to you in the past which make it difficult for you? Have you got ADHD, learning disorders? Know yourself and know what you are like. And it's only by knowing yourself and being honest with yourself and speaking to others whose opinions you value to get information about yourself, because you don't always realise things. Things can be hidden in plain sight, or your ego doesn't recognise certain things. Your mind doesn't recognise certain things, or certainly the executive mind that you think controls who you are. So speak to other people and know yourself. It might be through meditation, it might be through journaling. What are you like? Can you admit that you're not perfect, and do you know what your strengths and weaknesses are? What a powerful thing to do, to identify your strengths and weaknesses and know them. Know yourself. What's your mind? What is your mind like day by day? Is it a friend? Is it a foe? Is it mostly a friend, mostly a foe? What can you do about that? So know yourself and how you tick. Who are the people you hang around with? I mean, it's often said that you are the sum of like the 5 people who you spend most of your time with. Are they good people? Are they the kind of people that if you saw other people with, you go, yeah, they're good people, they're good influences on you? Or are you hanging around or spending time mostly with negative people who are negative influences? If so, you need to address that. I was once out in a bar and I heard a group of lads, I heard some of the language they used directed towards a woman who was within earshot. And I remember thinking that I would not allow any of my friends to speak like that to someone in front of me. And partly I would think that I would never be friends with someone who would do that and say that out loud to someone else. And I remember thinking, like, who were these people? Like, surely his mates are going to say something about what he said, and they were just like laughing themselves without giving too much away. So, who are you hanging around with? What kind of people do you mix with, and what can you do about it? I said earlier as well about knowing when to deal with a situation. And it can be very hard when you feel like you're the only one who wants to resolve a situation and the other person isn't. But a few strategies which you might find useful are the 24 or 48 hour strategy. This is where you say, right, there's an issue here. I'm going to spend 24, 48 hours before I attempt to resolve that issue or speak to that person about it. Now, obviously, if you've got water shooting out of a pipe at home, you don't say, right, I'll come back in 24 hours. But you know what I mean? There are certain situations where you go, right, there's a stressful situation here. I'm going to give it 24, 48 hours, have a little think, and try and come up with a rational solution to it before we move forward. The other thing you can do is use journals, which I've mentioned before, and I've got a couple of videos on my YouTube channel about write down what your issues are and then think about your emotions surrounding those issues and then think, what can I do to resolve them? Ultimately, the best thing you can learn in life is to deal with situations that arise that need to be resolved and doing it properly. If you like, that's like the most intelligent thing you can do in the pursuit of well-being and happiness and creating a better life for you and for those around you. So write things down. Think of your own strategies to help you. It might be that you have a little thing that you do with your hands. I was talking to someone who does neuro-linguistic programming recently who says when they connect their thumb and first fingernails together, that's a sign that they're going to feel good. And it's like a little trigger they just do to say, right, I know that this is going to make me feel good, and you just do it. Just a little thing to break the cycle or whatever. And that's part of NLP or neuro-linguistic programming. Quite a few other strategies may be the Indian stick strategy, which I first heard used. I forget who it was now, but it's where you allow someone to speak and they get whatever issue off their chest and you sit there listening and nodding and that. And then when they've finished, you repeat back what they said to their satisfaction. And then when they say yes, they know that you've fully appreciated where they're coming from. So they speak about the issue and you non-judgmentally listen and then you repeat back what they said. And it just marks out an environment or a landscape of understanding. And sometimes that can be enough. It's very hard if you've got someone else who's not used to this or I haven't got time for this kind of thing, and no one's got time to have proper conflict resolution in life because of all the demands in life. But the Indian stick method is very useful. Once you've done that, you then switch it and the person speaks about what they're bothered about and the other person repeats it back. And once you've done that, you've heard the other person fully appreciate your situation, and you've heard what the original issue was and thought about it deeply and then repeated it back to the person who's got that issue. And the Indian stick method can be very, very helpful. And apparently it's a Native American thing from back in the day, might still be practiced by many of those communities. Another thing can be the first word you use in resolution with someone close to you, and it might be, I love you, but, and you say about an issue. And you try to explain the issue rather than blame it on the person. So you might say, I love you, but, when you don't open the letters for long periods of time and let them build up, that makes me feel like you don't particularly care about us keeping on top of things within the household, or whatever the issue might be. And, some people don't like it when you leave the toilet seat up and down and all that, and then people get wound up about things like that. So it can just be a way of saying, I love you, but, and again, you just explain the environment of the situation. But again, you've got to time these things correctly, and it can be very hard when you've got children and jobs, finding quality time to talk about these things and to find the right mood. And it may well be that you set aside time each week to talk about issues, or write them down and say, listen, I've got a few things here I need to talk about, and then talk about them. But when people are angry and wound up, it just makes things 10 times worse. Another thing you can do is, if you've got issues on your mind, and some people go to counsellors, and I've found counselling very useful when I've done it, is you can have a critical friend, maybe a sibling, or just someone to speak to who you trust, who'll listen and give you an honest opinion back. And I think I've mentioned before, Mark Twain said, some of the worst things in my life never happened. You often spend a lot of time worrying about things. And I had something on my mind a couple of months ago, and I told someone who I trusted didn't work, and he listened to me and went, you've got nothing to worry about, don't worry about it. And just hearing them kind of calmed me down. And he said, well, if that happens, then you do this. And I'd had this thing swim around in my head for weeks. And he really, really calmed me down. And sometimes just talking about it, writing it down, it then gets it out. So it's not this stream of consciousness swimming around causing stress. It's taken outside you and shared, and then someone else will say, you're worrying about something that you don't worry about. Or if that's true, then you do this. Or if that's true, what should you do? And they just get you to explain what you would do in that situation. And that can be very, very helpful as well. Lads, men, again, I don't want to generalise, often find it harder to talk about emotions. And regardless of what gender you are, bottling things up doesn't help. And getting it out there can be very helpful. And sometimes you're the worst judge of whether things are truly bothering you or not. Then it can become a little bit too late and things blow up, or you explode in another situation. So these things build up, and without dealing with them and addressing them, they can cause crisis, they can cause neuroses, and issues like depression, anxiety, etc., etc. One of the worst things about particularly relationships, maybe intimate, close relationships with people, is elevation, particularly if you're living in the same house as people. And it can be family, it can be a loved one, it can be children. And it's about knowing when to do things properly. And it may well be that you develop a time out sign, whatever it might be. It might just be the classic one, like time out. I'm not dismissing this issue, but I need a time out, and we'll talk about it later. Might also be that you have a sign for when you feel like the other person is upsetting you, and then they can maybe see that and think, oh, okay, maybe I can change the way I'm doing this, or okay, let's leave it till later. Again, showing that kind of wisdom and understanding. I've mentioned before, things need to be solution focused as well. So if people are moaning and getting upset and all that and having a go at you, that's all very well, and it might need to come out, but you need to think, right, well, what do we do to resolve this? What do we do moving forward? And things need to get to that point, rather than people just explaining why they hate each other or explaining their negatives about everything. And sometimes you might need a third party to help you with that kind of stuff. The other thing here to remember is control. There are some people who think that they can't control their responses. That is wrong, and it's not wise to think that you cannot control your response. Now again, if someone puts your hands in the fire, even if you can't see what they're doing, you're going to feel pain and you're going to yank your hands out really quickly. We're talking here about emotions. Sometimes things happen and you can completely fly off the handle and make things worse. And you'll have a physiological response, an emotional response, but you can then just let things calm down. 90 seconds, okay, I'm wound up, need to let this emotion pass before you address it. And you can control the way you respond to any situation. No one can ever take that away from you. Do not give your control to others. You show control about how you react to things as much as possible. Reactions are not always automatic. You have a lot of control in the way that you respond to things, and that's also very, very important. Another thing in terms of equanimity is saying sorry. Even when you haven't done that much wrong, sometimes you can be the big person going, I'm sorry about that issue, that wasn't good enough and I won't do that again, or I'll be better with that. And even if the other person doesn't then apologise for the thing that you think they did, which might be worse, you're being a bigger person. You're modelling virtue to others. And you're also making yourself feel better. It's not about that other person. It's about what you're in control of. What they do is down to them. You can't control them. You can control your responses and the way that you interact with them. It can be very hard with people very, very close to you, maybe family and people who you cohabit with, sometimes friends, etc., who can let you down, sometimes work colleagues. The key thing is you've got to stay calm at all times, and it can be very, very hard. Someone might cheat on someone, throw your stuff out, not do something they promised, be in lots of debt and haven't told you about it, or whatever it might be. There can be all kinds of things that someone might do. You need to identify what your red lines are and your boundaries. And it might well be that you need to walk away from a particular situation. I know people who don't speak to the parents because they say it's just too toxic. And I speak to both my parents, and I find every day I spend with them, or know them, or speak to them, sacred, because they're not going to be around forever. And I accept that others might find that a situation is so toxic that they might need to step away from that situation. And if that's what you need to do, then that's what you need to do. And you do need to have boundaries and red lines, and you sometimes need to call a situation out and say, this isn't working. That isn't to say that you're making out you're perfect. We're all flawed. It might be that there's things about you that make that situation worse. Call them out as well. See if you can work on them with a counsellor or with someone else. Write about them. Write them down. What are the things you do that cause problems for others? See if you can work on them. But it may well be that you need to walk away, because there's nothing worse than that toxicity in relationships, particularly with those close to you. People who you love as well, there are going to be tensions, and it's about the bigger picture. This person is my brother or sister or whatever, my parents, my good friend. They've let me down. I'm going to say what I'm unhappy about, but I know I love them and they're there for me and they've been there for me or whatever. You've got to think like that as well, that we're all fundamentally flawed at some level. And Paul Cope, who we heard speak, I've just ordered his book, he's a counsellor. Paul Cope said, at the end of the day, everyone is mad to some degree. We do need to show humility, and we need to strive to be better. We need to be patient with others. But also, I think sometimes you need to have those red lines and clear boundaries, and that might mean moving away from people who just bring out the worst in you and the worst in them. Be selfish. You need to be more selfish as well. And people say, like, selfish is bad, isn't it? But anger is bad for you. It drains you. It can be useful in certain situations, but if you're getting angry all the time, it really affects the quality of your life, and you need to be selfish, and if necessary, move away from those situations. I'm going to be selfish and look after me because I know that that's not good for me. It's also then not good for anyone else. Children to see that, for your partner to see that, for people who are close to you to see that. So don't be that person who does that. Have your red lines, have your boundaries, but make sure that you do not get angry, because it just impacts on you and it's not good for you. That was me talking about equanimity, staying calm. If you know how to do it and you're an expert in equanimity, then please let me know, because it's very much a work in progress. And like most things in life, everything's a work in progress. Everything is about enjoying the present moment, trying to be selfish about enjoying every present moment, and moving forward and getting better. And I think that's what equanimity is for me. That'll do, I think. It's Sunday evening. I hope you've enjoyed the recent podcasts with Joanna, Steve, Tony Buck, talking about yoga, talking about, in terms of Steve and Tony Buck as well, like turning their lives around and taking the initiative. And I hope that you found them helpful. If you want to come on to the podcast, get involved in any way, you know where I am. And you can follow me on Twitter and message me on Twitter too. So have a great day for the rest of your day. And remember today, if nothing else, keep nice and cool, because that's the way that we do things. That's the way that we should do things. And I always remember the great TV series Roots from the 1970s, where the young men from the African village go for manhood training. And the Contango, the teacher says to them, the way of the Mendinka is not easy, but it is best. And he's saying sometimes it's not